Hello all and welcome to our first scrutiny panel, Children's Services. I'm your chair for this evening, Councillor Hodan Haley, and I also have Vice Chair, Councillor Stafford. We're going to start our meeting. We've got a few things to get through. Are the officers online?
Angie Denison.
Okay. Regarding our agendas, we're going to start with, we have apologies from Robert South. There are no urgent matters. Are there any matters there's no matters to be considered in private. And I don't have any declaration of interest. Members, if you do have declaration of interest, let us know. We're going to go to item 5, where we have to agree terms of reference. I'm sure we all had the report. Do we agree terms of reference? All agreed? Thank you.
Yes.
Outline for the work program. Do we all agree?
Yes.
Can I just ask a question? Is that subject to some flexibility if an issue comes up?
Yeah, there will
okay.
be.
I just wanted to check that.
Yeah. One of the dates that I would like to highlight for the 7th of November, the meeting has been asked if we can change it to 14th of November. And we will be looking at child poverty the report will be based on school exclusions. And I will be sending an email out on that. So we've reviewed all the items and now we'll have John Churchill, who will be representing our report for this evening.
He has just joined online.
Okay. We'll give him a few minutes. Is there any other questions while we wait for John? Do you have any questions?
No, I don't.
Yes,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Trying to make my computer work.
Oh, that's fine. The report is right here. If you don't have that, yeah. John, can you hear us? Hello, Angie, can you hear us?
I can hear. I'm just speaking to John to see, just trying to find out what the problem is.
Oh,
So
okay,
to just
thank you.
ask him to perhaps come out and go back in. He
Okay.
says he can't hear. I can hear you and I can see you. So I'm
Perfect,
just clarifying with John. So I'm really sorry. Can you just give us 1 minute and see if we can
Of
just sort
course.
this out?
Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you very much.
I still can't hear anyone. Can you? I can't hear anyone else.
Hi, John, we can hear you now. Can you hear us?
Yes, the wonders of technology. Apologies for that.
It's okay. Thank you for being here. So we'll wait for you now. Are you ready?
Yes, I am. Would it be helpful? Okay, fine. Okay.
Yeah, start when you're ready. Thank you, John.
Okay. I'm assuming that you've seen the document. It's quite a lengthy document. So if you like, I'll go through a shortened version, which is a summary, and then I can take questions after that if that suits everybody. So the self-evaluation is an annual document that we prepare. It's something that Ofsted require from us. It enables them to get a better sense of where we're at and where we feel we're at when we have our annual engagement meeting, which we had last Wednesday, I think it was. But it's also a document for us. It's a living document for Ealing Children's Services and Ealing, wider Ealing as well. So we get a better view of where we're at and where we think we're at and why we think we are where we are. So the current context is a strong political, corporate and inter-directorate wider partnership commitment to delivering positive outcomes for all of Ealing's children and young people. Our schools are among the best in the country, 98% rated good or outstanding. There's clear organisation-wide commitment to children's services and integrated working. Services for children and young people with additional needs and early help offers are strengthening. And in terms of what we know about the quality and impact of social work in Ealing, since 2009, when we had our last graded inspection, which was when we were graded requires improvement, we've been on a journey to improve and strengthen our offer to children. And we've now got a strong early help, which is something that we're still building on, but it is a stronger early help offer than we've had. And we've still retained our earned autonomy through the Strengthening Families, which is a fund that we receive, or a grant we receive through the Department for Levelling Up. Our thresholds at the front door are understood and clear, and that allows us to manage our demand effectively. So even though we've had more contacts coming through to the front door in Ealing Children's Services than we've ever had, we've actually been able to manage the level of work that goes through into the teams that sit behind the front door. So they've not been overwhelmed with that work, and actually we've focused on strengthening the links with community partners so that we can see if there's a better option out there rather than a more standard statutory response. Our timeliness of our work has improved, our assessment timeliness is increasing, our ability to get to an initial child protection conference within the time that we set has improved, and our re-referral rates are low, which suggests that we're closing down the work that we should be, and we're staying with families that we should be. What else? There's various parts of the work we're focusing on. Our quality of direct work is something that is uppermost in our mind, because that's the bit that really gives us an insight into a child's lived experience. And if we don't have that, then our plans aren't going to match the needs, because they won't be properly identified. We've had a reduction in the number of children in care. And it's also, not only is it a reduction, but it's a reduction as well within that reduction of older children that are coming into care. And that was always been a concern, because I think children that come into care later in their childhood, so 15, 16, 17-year-olds, the outcomes are invariably not as positive as we would like them to be. And they also cost a lot of money, the high cost placements. So to look at reducing that and actually support families to feel able to continue to care for children that present some degree of risk has been an effort for the last year, 18 months, and we've seen a reduction in the number of older children coming into care. Contrary to that, or you know, alongside that, we've had an increase in the number of younger children coming into care. So under 1-year-olds has been our largest increase, and then I think there's a number of reasons behind that. Our improved services to care leavers, that's a real strength of the department, and it's been recognised nationally, really, in terms of our offer to our care leavers. And it's part of a wider sense of responsibility that goes across the council, really. It's not just children's services. I think there's a real buy-in for everyone to improve the lives of our care leavers. And that's part of I think the recognition of having that as a protected characteristic as well. Our QA work, our quality assurance work, is improving, and we've got 70% of our workforce are now permanent. We want that to be more, but 70% is a good starting point. In terms of outside inspection or outside views of our work, rather than just ourselves, our own view, we've had 2 focused visits since our last graded inspection. One focused on our care leavers, our offer to care leavers, and the other focused on the activities loosely framed around our front door, and both were positive. So it gives us a sense that we're on the right direction in terms of improving our offer from where we were in 2019. In terms of the next 12 months, what we want to do is continue stabilising and building resilience of our workforce, and we want to look at building or developing a social care academy so that we can start to invest fully in our newly qualified social workers so that they remain with us and we retain that knowledge and we start to develop the strengths in the teams rather than have a more of a transient workforce. So actually having people that stick with Ealing throughout their, certainly the first parts of their career anyway. Effective practice across all areas built upon our commitment to our Brighter Futures model, which we can see embedding in our teams, that everyone is trained in it. We've got psychologists in the teams. So it's something that it's a constant drive to inform that, and it goes in sort of hand in hand with the ability to retain staff, because if you have a turnover of staff, then it dilutes that model all the time, because you've got to keep building up that knowledge of the model. But if you get people that stay within the team, stay within the service, then you build on that and you go from strength to strength. Strong educational outcomes, a focus on that, particularly improving outcomes for Black and Somali children. And there's been a back and forth I can see between Councillor and Robert on that, and there's a working group set up to look at that in particular. Improving the active involvement of children and young people in shaping our services, so much more of an understanding of what young people want from us and involving them in decision makings, not only in terms of recruitment, but actually having feedback from them in terms of what a service should look like. How can they navigate a service? And sort of building to a sort of realization of having what's sort of coined a young person-led inspection, really. So actually, let's turn it over to them. Let's see what they find about our service, and does it work for them? Really, does it make sense to them? Is it meeting their needs? What else? Placement sufficiency is not just an Ealing issue; it's a national issue, as I'm sure you're very much aware, in terms of the scarcity of appropriate placements for children that do come into care. And part of the offer that we now need to improve is our own in-house foster carers, and how can we make that more of an attractive career choice for people out there that want to look after children. We've had a decline in foster carers that have been recruited since COVID. I think the year before COVID we had 8 families or 8 households recruited, but since then I think the last year we had 3. So there is a reduction. And it's trying to look at how we can be creative in terms of using foster carers that we have at the moment, so that we don't lose them entirely from the capacity that they can offer, but also in recruiting new foster carers and what that offer might look like. because we know that that's the best place for children. If they do come into care, if they do need to be removed from their family home, the best place is for them to be in another home rather than in a residential setting. And of course, if they're in an Ealing foster care, then very much likely that they will be within Ealing, and so they can retain their links with their communities and their school and their friends, and that's what we want to do. Adolescent safeguarding is complex and continuing to be so, and it's making sure that we have the right offers, so we balance the ability to manage risk with keeping children in their communities as well. We prefer that they were based within their communities and remain in Ealing, but we have to always have a mind on the risk and that it doesn't become too difficult to manage and to mitigate against. And then the last commitment in the delivery or set out is the Race Equalities Commission and the Corporate Equalities Action Plan, and that's something that Angie and I are actually working on, looking at where we're at the moment and having a plan that meets sort of twofold really. One is to look at equity across our workforce, but also in terms of how we work with families and making sure that that is transparent and there is equity in terms of service delivery as well. And so it's looking at how our services and how our offer works. You know, if we look at sort of, if you like, ethnicity through our system, really, does it look as it should really? And it's looking to make sure that that we are being open and transparent with the communities that we're working with, really. So they're the 7 aims that have been sort of distilled from the self-evaluation, which, as I say, is a lengthy document. It's 70 pages, but it's in the initial executive summary from our strategic director. That's got the 7 goals for the next 12 months. So I don't know if there's questions on the bulk of it or specific areas that you would like to focus on or not sure about.
Thank you, John. Any questions? Any councillor Mohan?
Thank you, John. Very, very good report, very encouraging one. In terms of feedback from children and parents, it's all positive, which is a very good sign. Did we receive any criticism or negative comments?
Yes, we did. I mean, we had a survey done recently with our families that were working with our MAST service, which is working with children and families that are living in the community, so either under a child in need or a child protection plan. And out of 64 responses, 48 could be seen as positive, either wholly positive or sort of marginally positive, if you like, or fairly positive. But there were some that were not positive. Some of those did look to be, I think, a wrong fit really in terms of families coming to children's service, because actually it may not have been a children's service issue. It looked like it could have been a housing issue. So then there was, I suppose, a frustration that we weren't able to resolve an issue that wasn't wholly children's services. But others, I think, yeah, there are things for us to focus on in terms of our approach to families and understanding and taking the time to listen to families about what it is that they think they need help on, because they're usually the experts in their lives really, and I think we should be starting with them and understanding from them what has brought them to our attention really, and then take it from there really. So it puts the family, it evens things up. I think it puts the family in the driving seat of the work that we're trying to do with them. And I think often when there is anxiety around a social worker coming into your home for anybody, if they allow you to drive the pace of the work, it can calm things and help to build up a trusting relationship with the worker, and then you can get change that way.
Thank you.
Just a comment, John, on you said some of those comments that came in were related to housing. I take it that we are working closely with housing, because some of those, that's what we've been pushing.
Absolutely, and there are a number of pieces of work going on to strengthen that working relationship, because I think often when a family is on the cusp of being homeless, there is usually a social work issue behind that, and becoming homeless is the symptom of that really. So I think there is work there And we can be much more proactive, I think, in trying to help families before things become quite tight for them all.
I just wanted to make sure that that was how we looked at
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. Yeah,
And I
it is.
appreciate the reasons for the editing on the document, but I have a couple of other supplementary questions. One is the thing that I'm really interested in is that you say a number of under 1-year-olds, that's the largest increase in children coming to us at the moment. I'm very inquisitive about why and how we're dealing with that, because that's a fairly, it's not a new phenomenon, but the numbers have increased and that's a new kind of trajectory for the service.
Yes, it is. And it's something that we've partly recognised that it has increased and there is something unusual happening, if you like. So we've created a pre-birth panel to make sure that we are across all unborns that are coming to our attention. So we make sure that we are dealing with the risk appropriately. I think sometimes we were not fully aware of the risk, and that meant that we weren't able to do the preventive work in the sort of 5 or 6 months before the due date. And so then we were having to take more reactionary measures, because the risk is always, it's such a high level of risk when you've got an unborn and a parent that is struggling, and we don't know what that looks like when they're struggling. And having a young child in the home always raises stress because everyone gets very tired. So I think we have to have a cautious approach when there is a newborn. And that's meant that we've had children or newborns and parents going off to residential units for us to have a further period of assessment. And then we can ease into things when we actually know, and everyone is a known entity or a quantity in terms of their parenting. It's not just an Ealing thing. We have seen it across, or other authorities are reporting it as well. So I'm not sure whether that's sort of wider aspects of society feeding into that, in terms of people becoming more stretched and finding it more difficult. And therefore more families come into our attention because of that. But it's not just an Ealing thing. So yeah, we have got work that we are doing with it, and we're part of a national piece of research, or sort of yeah, it is research, I think, really, with I think it's research in practice, really looking at how we are all responding across the country, and we've been able to sort of cherry pick some ideas, really, and that's what's led to us developing our pre-birth panel, because we realised that it is a specialism and we need to be much more aware of that, really. So yeah, it's an ongoing piece of work. I think the other aspect of that is that our adoptions have been quite low, and there's a natural link between having a number of young children coming into care and whether that will then percolate down to having an increase in adoptions.
Just, you probably won't be able to give me the answer at the moment, but I'd be interested to know what sort of parental age we're talking about with these new babies.
Yes, and it's actually, it varies. We've had some in sort of late 30s, even I think 40s, and then but the majority, I think, are younger. We've had some very young parents, sort of 16, 17. I think we've got one that's even younger now, actually just come to our attention. And some of those young people are themselves looked after as well. So it is.
So that could be preventative work that needs to be done.
Absolutely, yeah, it is. And in fairness to the Leaving Care Service, they do have they have a lot of involvement with health in terms of support for care leavers, specific support for care leavers, sexual health clinics. They've also got, actually, you know, when a care leaver does become a parent, they've also got a lot of specific work they do with them, linking them in with other care leavers that are parents as well. But yeah, I think there's a lot more preventative work that we could do.
Yeah, but it would be wider than just care leavers, wouldn't it?
Oh, it is. Yes, exactly. Yeah. But I think it's the early identification. That's the key to it, really, so that we can get in and see what it is that's going on. And then we can have a better sense of the ability of the parent and what support they've got around them. Part of what we're doing in terms of prevention is to, we've brought our own family group conference service. We developed one in-house now. Previously, we were looking to commission it. And a lot of that work is going into looking at the strengths in the family. And if you've got a young person who's about to be a parent, that's when they need all the support around them, and not so much a statutory, but actually that day-to-day support, and someone even living with them or then living with somebody else, so that the child can remain in the home. And that's what we want to be focusing on, working towards.
Okay. I do have another question. I'll let someone else speak.
I think Councillor Kingston has another question.
Hi, John, you mentioned one of your biggest challenges is staff retention. Is there any, this seems to be across the council, is it any worse in sort of children's services? I'd imagine you'd need to be quite emotionally resilient.
Yes, that is true. And I was talking to someone the other day about the sickness levels, and it is higher in children's services and, in fairness, in adult services. And we were speculating on why that might be. Across all the services in the council, the absence rate is much higher in those two areas. And I think you're right. It is that emotional demand that it takes on workers, and because it's a vocation as well. So I think people they do put a lot of themselves into the job. They don't switch off, and that can be to their detriment sometimes. And you need to be a strong manager to actually tell people to log off and go home, and it will be better in the morning. But I think part of what we want to do is to create an environment where we can have newly qualified workers coming into working for Ealing, but we allow them the space, genuinely allow them the space to develop. So we don't give them a whole lot of work to begin with. We actually give them the time to get to know Ealing, get to know the teams, get to know the job, get to know our model in a way that they feel really protected from the work. And then we can give them the work with the support alongside it. So not just the support in the team, but actually having two sort of advanced practitioners that can float around and support them in that work, go out with them on visits, talk about what they're doing, help them think through why they're going into the home. What are you going to see this family for? What do you not know? What do you want to find out? What happens if they say that? And then to have a debrief after it. And it's that sort of thing, when you're learning from someone on the job, you really do, that's when you develop really well. So that's what we want to do. And that's the bit that helps people stay. I think people talk about pay, and it is, it's always going to be an issue because times are tight, but I think it is as much having a caseload that you feel allows you to do what you want to do, and a manager that supports you. And if you've got managers that are emotionally robust and can support people and keep people contained, and you've got caseloads that are reasonable, that you can do the work, then I think people are more likely to stay. That's when people do stay. I think when people leave, they may mention pay, but actually that may not be the reason why they've considered leaving. It's often other things, but that's just the easy thing that they look to.
Thank you. Councillor Stafford.
Thank you. Just a few questions from me. The first one, really generally, you said the last time Ofsted inspected the service, it requires improvement. When's the next likely inspection? And if it were tomorrow, what would you guess the rating would be?
If it was tomorrow, I think they would find us good. And I think the next inspection, when we met with them on, I think, Tuesday or Wednesday last week, and we always ask them when you come in, just to see what their reaction is. And they obviously never tell us, but they did say the next time they visit, it will be a graded inspection. It won't be another focus visit. And they did say it will be a month's. So we actually thought they were going to be here this side of the Christmas or the summer break. So we expect them to be any time from the 4th of September on. That's when they could next call. So I would be surprised if they're not here before the end of October. That's our thinking, really. And I think that they would find us good. We know from where we were back in 2019, the improvements we've made across the board in terms of practice, but also just in terms of the infrastructure, the reporting that we've now got, the dashboards that we have that help us to see where our resources should be and give us a sense that we're working as we should be, which we had none of that in 2019. We couldn't really even run a report to say when children have been visited. It was really quite bleak. And so we knew we were on a sticky wicket straight away, really. But I think this time around, as I say, we've got much more infrastructure, and that sort of grip on management shows itself out in terms of how the teams are managed and how the cases are being progressed. I think, in fairness, there's still some inconsistency in certain areas, and they will see that. I mean, we're working on that very hard to try and even it out and try and get some more systematic practice in place. But I think overall, we've got some really strong areas, and I would think that would equal out. That I think on balance we would come down as good. Would be horrified if we didn't say we were good. If we came out and requires improvement again, I think that would be quite shocking, really.
Thank you. And I just want to focus in just briefly on education. So you talk in the report that 98% of Ealing schools are rated good or outstanding. Is that solely local authority schools, or does that include academies? And does the figure differ if you take the academies out?
Oh, I don't know. Julie Lewis will be able to answer that straight away. So maybe we can let you
come back.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry.
And then the priority areas around Black, Caribbean and white disadvantaged pupils. Obviously, I understand the Race Equality Commission, the Ealing Race Equality Commission, focused in specifically on Black Caribbean. Is that because they were the minority group or the group that had the worst attainment, or comparative to the average, or have you put that in because it was they were bad, but it was the Equality Commission that put them in? And I suppose what I'm interested in is how, if they are the worst group, how much worse than from the next group would be, and how we're making sure that by focusing on one group, we're not doing it to the disadvantage of another group that just happens to be just slightly better, but still pretty bad. So that's what I'm trying to understand there.
Yes, that's fair. And I don't have that to hand. I've got the data that I got is on exclusions really, and looking at how we can reduce the overrepresentation of Black, Caribbean and Somali children in our figures of exclusion, but not on attainment. So again, I could, unless I've got it in the pack, but I could ask Julie to.
Yeah, if someone could come back to me on that, either now or offline, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Bikini.
Thank you. John, thank you so much for your report. I read it and I have a very specific question in regards to mentors in preventing violence prevention. It's stated that there are still 4 high schools to finish the training. I'm a bit curious to know which schools are they?
I don't know if I want to name them actually. I can. And I can think of 1 or 2, and it's not that they're not interested. I think it's the pace that we want to do it in really, and I think it needs to coincide with the school being in the right frame to have the capacity to commit to doing the training of the mentors. But it's not going away. So we will continue with reaching out to those schools to look at what we can do to make it an attractive offer for them, because I feel quite passionate about it, and I think it really does work. And so we had a conference just last November, I think, with the mentors and teachers from the schools. It's a great thing to be doing, and we want to continue doing that. So I would hope that when the schools see the benefit of that and start to get a sense of the changing cultures that can be brought about through that, then they would want to be part of it. And it's certainly not, it's an ongoing conversation. We're not just going to leave it with the schools that we've got. It's part of our program to continue to going back to schools and looking at how we can make it an attractive offer, and how it's a flexible delivered approach as well. It can be both in person and online as well. It does work. Yeah.
Thank you. I've got another question in regards to Ofsted inspections. Were all Ealing schools inspected in 2019?
No, I don't think they would have been, no. Again, I don't think all the schools are inspected every year. That's my...
No, they're not.
No.
Can I come in?
Yeah, I know, but I've got I heard that there was a specific school that didn't really have an inspection since 2014.
I'd be surprised.
Which is very long time for it's a primary school. So okay.
Unless you want to, you could always email me or Julie, and we can look to see whether that is. I'll be surprised if a school went that long without an inspection. That's 9 years. That would seem
okay. I will email you on that. Thank you.
Yeah.
John, I have a few questions, but before my questions, I think Councillor Rai has been waiting. You sure? Okay, thank you. John, thank you so much for the presentation. Regarding the early help and intervention that you have mentioned, I'm just concerned about how are we reaching for those communities and asylum seekers and refugees families within Ealing, and how are we also supporting asylum seekers and refugees families who got children with SEND when it comes to the education healthcare plan? As you know, there was an event last week, and I'm sure you've got the minutes, and there's a lot of dismay and disheartening parents not feeling being supported when it comes to SEND area and assessment, allocations, funding, schools, placement, the list goes on, John. So how are we then engaging with those parents so we can better our service? That's my first question. And you talked about the survey. It's well and nice that we've got an amazing track of records and facilities and support out there. But then again, we're missing the purpose at times. How then do we reach for those who are not able to read very well, who got limited in English families? And you know, in Ealing, we have over 160 languages from all different communities. Do we have a strong translation facilities available? If not, then how can we better those systems? That's my two questions, but thank you so much.
Yeah, and they're very good points. And yes, yes, clearly, it's. I was going to say the surveys that we've done have been written returns, and it's been English. So I completely take that. I know that we've introduced, or we are introducing, an app called Mind of My Own, and that does have the ability to translate into, I was going to say all the languages, pretty much most of the languages that we would find in Ealing, I would think. And it allows young people to directly input their well-being, what they want to do, what their views are, anything they want to say to the social worker. And then it's just instantly translated into English for the social worker to read. So you can see how we can start to use apps that are going to be much more able to mean that we can reach communities or break down the barriers with languages, I suppose, that otherwise can be quite clunkily overcome. In terms of communities, I think our Children with Disabilities team, I know they are heavily involved with parent groups, and there is a lot of representation and feedback into the team about resources and how they are distributed, or how people are assessed, and how need is met within that service. But I would probably need to. Ruth Meader is probably the best person who can answer that in terms of how we do make sure that we are meeting the needs of children out there, and that we don't have children that are escaping our attention, if you like, and going, neglected in terms of their needs, really, especially when they're such acute needs. I know in terms of families that are seeking asylum, we've had a notification that the Stay Club in sort of Perivale area is going to be used for families to move into. And there are families there already, I think, because I've seen some of the statistics coming through. And so what we've got is a worker at our front door, a manager at the front door, who's going to be linked with that resource, just to see what the needs are of families that are going to be moving into that area, just so that we can get a much better sense of what the need might be. And our health colleagues would need to know as well in terms of GP surgeries, as would the education colleagues in terms of schools in the area. So at the minute, it's an unknown in terms of what that can be, other than just the sheer numbers that people are talking about. But we don't know what need is going to be contained within that. So it's one thing that we're trying to do. But I take your point that actually there's much more we could be doing in terms of knowing what the needs are. This extremely vulnerable cohort.
Thank you, John. One last question for me. I do agree, as Councillor Stafford had mentioned earlier, regarding on building a strong educational outcomes for the Black Caribbean boys. And Black Somali boys was not mentioned in the initiative on the report right now, but I've highlighted that earlier. I've sent an email out to highlight that. So although both communities have the same barriers and same challenges, we must not forget other communities. I know that the Tamil community are also in a lower attainment, and maybe the Bangladeshi community. So if our Ealing initiative for this academic year is just going to focus on one aspect of Black Caribbean boys, then we are never going to get the target that we want to get. So I think we should think about, we say, transparency and inclusivity, but I would like this initiative to be amended and include those other communities who have the right to improve their education attainments for these specific communities. And I thank you for your time. I think Councillor Kwansha has her hands up. Sorry, Councillor, if you could ask your question.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'm sorry, I'm keeping my camera off because I'm still recovering from ill health, but it's basically building on what you just said, as well as Councillor Stafford, about the one important point is delivering the commitments set out in the Race Equality Commissions. And I just wanted to ask how far I put it in the chat as well, how far we engaging with agencies like Victoria Climbié Foundation that stress the importance of cultural competency training, and not just for children and families, but specifically for African children. I think it ties up with the points you've raised already, because I think it's really important to start with that model, which helps us to understand the intricacies of why certain groups of young people, especially those of African Caribbean descent, are struggling in children's services and across the social strata. So I'd like to hear a bit more about that, please. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I will speak to Jill Pearce, who is our training and development lead, head of service for that area, and talk to her about that, because we've had training on microaggressions and unconscious bias, but I think there is, and as I was saying earlier, there's sort of, it's in some sense it's twofold. One is how we work with each other and how we go around our daily work, if you like, and I think the other part is how we work with families, and we spend a lot of time talking to workers and managers about understanding the lived experience of young people. And I think, I personally think, if you aren't comfortable or able to talk about what it might be to be a 15-year-old Somali lad living in Acton and what perceptions people may have of you, then you're missing out on a huge part of what it is to be that young person. And so I think we need to skill up our workers to be comfortable in talking about race and inequality. Otherwise, they're doing a disservice to the families they're working with, really, and they won't then have they won't have an understanding of what it is like to be that young person, and therefore everything we do will be slightly skewed, really, and not really meeting the mark. So I will talk to Jill, because that seems a valid suggestion, really, in terms of having quite specific organisations that could
absolutely
help workers be more confident and actually understand that what that might be for a young person like that to navigate through life at the moment.
Thank you, John. It was a factor in the Victoria Climbié case. Race did play a part, and in fact, the foundation has been born out of that particular public inquiry, and they're offering training. So I've actually put the link there.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Does anyone have any more comments or questions? John, I'll end up with one last question from the chair again. I do apologise. Looking at the report, I know we have, in terms of homeless families, I know you mentioned that a little bit earlier. I know there's a benefit, I know there's a shortage of affordable homes. I do understand that. Can you elaborate on how do we assess families who are homeless? How then do we allocate them? What are the process for these families? And if they do become homeless, I know the right protocols to follow myself, but I think it's difficult officers and counsellors to understand these issues. So if you could just highlight the assessment that they have to go through and how the assessment looks like, that would be quite helpful.
Well, I guess it's twofold, really. One is whether they have, or whether our housing colleagues have a duty to provide them with housing under their various acts or not. And if not, then it would be for children's services to provide accommodation for a family. You can't be a family that's homeless, as it were, in Ealing. There will be somewhere for you, and we will provide accommodation for a family. The accommodation, it wouldn't be what you would ideally want a family to be living in, and it will be a bed and breakfast somewhere. And sometimes it can go on for far too long. And we're talking 18 months or so of a family living in sort of temporary accommodation in a bed and breakfast. And so that then it creates its own issues in terms of our involvement. We become more and more involved as issues start to emerge. So it's not a great thing in itself, and it's not the solution. What we try and do is to help families, I suppose, realise the reality of the housing market at the moment. And some families, you may want to be in Ealing, but they will not be able to fund or provide or have the benefits that are going to fund accommodation where they want to be. And so we then look where can families live and have a much better quality of life, albeit it's not going to be within Ealing, perhaps it may be further afield. But it's trying to get that balance between remaining in Ealing and what that would look like, or somewhere else where you get a better quality of life, or whether you've got relatives, family that can support you to remain in Ealing. And it is very, I won't pretend it's not very difficult, because it is difficult, and it's not easy working in that area. But it's the framework that we have to work within, and we don't want to be, I suppose, spending a fair old bit of money providing families to living accommodation that we think actually it's not a good quality of life for you or your children, and it's quite it's quite sad.
Anyone questions, recommendation or statements? John, is it possible if you could share these school attainments for the lower achievement regarding the ethnic communities that we've mentioned, the data? Would that be possible? Yeah.
I will speak to Julie.
Email
I'm sure.
to all of us.
Yes.
There's no comment, so thank you so much, everybody. And that's the end of our first meeting. Thank you all for attending. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.